The dust tasted like regret, a bitter grit on Cyrus Bogard's tongue, as he rode into the sun-bleached corpse of Cedar Falls. 5 years in Yuma had carved the softness from him, leaving behind a man of sinew and shadow, his prison-issued clothes hanging loose on a frame that once broke wild mustangs. The town unfolded before him like a faded tapestry, weathered storefronts, warped boardwalks, groaning under the weight of ordinary lives, the air thick with the familiar scent of horse sweat leather and judgment. He dismounted outside Murphy's saloon, his boots hitting the hard-packed earth with a finality that echoed the closing of a cell door. The saloon's swinging doors fell still as he entered, and the lively chatter within died a sudden death. Every face turned eyes narrowing with a cold recognition reserved for specters from a bad memory. Pete Murphy, the saloon keeper, wiped a glass with a rag, his voice flat. "Heard you was getting out. Didn't think you'd have the brass to show your face in decent company again." "Just looking for honest work," Cyrus said, his voice low, stripping the defiance from the words until they were a simple statement of fact. A bitter laugh erupted from a corner table. "Honest work," Thaddeus Clay, a rancher with a tobacco-stained mustache, scoffed into his whiskey. "That's rich coming from a killer." The word hung in the air, a ghost he'd known would be waiting for him. He met their stares, feeling the weight of their fear and condemnation. He'd paid his debt in years, but here it was, a currency with no value. The bartender gave a curt nod toward the door. "We don't serve killers here." The rejection was a familiar script. Henderson's general store, the telegraph office, the livery stable, each door closed a little harder than the last. Decent folks crossed the street rather than share his shadow. By late afternoon, hunger gnawed at his gut, and his mare's soft nicker mirrored his own growing despair. As the sun bled, amber and rose over the western mountains, he stood at the edge of town, a man with nowhere to go. That's when he saw the argument. A woman, her back straight as a rifle barrel, stood beside a weathered buckboard, facing down the town banker, Eli Whitmore. Her hands were clenched at the sides of a faded calico dress, her chin held high against his patronizing gestures. A young boy peeked out from behind the wagon, clutching a wooden toy horse with a grip that spoke of a world already understood to be unkind. "Your husband's debts didn't die with him," Whitmore's voice carried on the still air. "The mortgage comes due in 6 months. Frankly, I don't see how you'll manage." "I'll manage," she replied, her voice laced with a steel that could only be forged on the frontier. Curiosity, a dangerous impulse he thought Yuma had beaten out of him, overrode caution. He found himself walking toward them, every instinct screaming to ride on, to avoid the inevitable complication and the fresh disappointment he represented. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "couldn't help but overhear. I'm looking for work if you're hiring." She turned her green eyes, taking in his travel-worn appearance, the careful way he held himself. "What kind of work?" "Ranch work. I can mend fences, break horses, handle cattle. I'm not afraid of honest labor." "You have references?" "Not sure no one for no Kidirin Martant. I've been away for a while, but I know horses and I know hard work." "What's your name?" "Cyrus Bogard, ma'am." The recognition was a physical blow. Her eyes widened and she pulled her son closer. "You're the man from Tombstone." "Yes, ma'am. I served my time, all of it. I'm not looking for charity, just a chance." Opaline Turner looked toward the town that had refused her credit, offered her pennies for her land. She looked at her son's curious, unafraid eyes. She looked at her own work-raw hands. $20 a month, plus meals and a bed in the barn, she said, her decision cutting through the tension. "You pull your weight, respect my property and my son, and keep your past in the past." "Yes, ma'am, you won't regret this." Her gaze was steady, holding a universe of hope and fear. "I hope not, Mr. Bogard. Lord knows I can't afford to regret much more." The Turner Ranch was a stubborn heart still beating in a neglected body. Cyrus saw it the moment they rode into the valley, the good bones of the small house, the potential in the overgrazed pastures, the silent plea in the sagging barn roof. It was a place that remembered better days, a truth echoed in the determined set of Opaline's shoulders as she showed him the barn that would be his room. Samuel became his shadow before the first cup of coffee the next morning. The boy's curiosity was a live thing, his questions peppering the crisp air as Cyrus set to work on the corral fence. "Why do horses sleep standing up?" Cyrus drove a nail with a precise tap of the hammer. "They don't always, but they can lock their legs, rest their muscles. Lets them run quick if there's danger." The boy considered this with a gravity beyond his years. "Are you dangerous?" The hammer stilled in Cyrus's hand. He looked down into the child's unafraid eyes. I was once. I did a bad thing, and I paid for it. But I don't aim to be dangerous anymore. Mama says everyone deserves a second chance. Your mama's a wise woman. The work was a language his body had forgotten it knew. He rose in the pre-dawn dark, the rhythm of mending, building, and tending, settling into his muscles like a returning memory. Opaline was a constant, capable presence, managing the household, the garden, the ledgers, with a quiet efficiency that spoke of years doing too much alone. Evenings found them on the porch as the sun bled behind the mountains, Samuel playing with his wooden horse while a comfortable silence stretched between the adults woven from mutual respect and shared exhaustion. He noticed the small things, the way she hummed an old hymn while kneading bread, how she always served him and Samuel the largest portions, claiming she'd eaten earlier. The patient way she corrected the boys reading her finger, tracing the words on the page. One evening, with coyotes singing a lonely chorus in the hills, Samuel fell asleep against Cyrus's leg, his head a warm weight. Cyrus looked down, a strange, tight feeling in his chest unraveling. He's taken to you, Opaline observed softly from her rocking chair. He's a good boy, reminds me of myself, before. The word hung there incomplete. Before you lost your way, she offered, setting her sewing aside. Something like that. The lamplight carved the lines of his face, highlighting the scar along his jaw. What was it like, prison? The question, when it came, didn't surprise him. He listened to the boy's even breathing, lonely, loud and quiet all at once. But it taught me things. And what kind of things? That anger is a poison you drink hoping someone else gets sick. That a man's past doesn't have to be his future if he's willing to work for something better. Is that what you're doing here? Her gaze was direct, seeing too much, working for something better. He met her eyes, and in that stretched moment, a thread of understanding passed between them, a recognition of two solitary ships navigating the same dark water. I hope so, ma'am. The spell was broken by Samuel's stir. Cyrus gently lifted the boy, carrying him to his bed, with a care that felt both new and deeply familiar. Weeks bled into a month. The corral stood rebuilt, the barn roof no longer leaked, and two wild horses began to lose their skittishness under his patient hands. Samuel was an eager apprentice, learning to curry the gentler mounts and fill water troughs without spilling. The change was in the quiet spaces between the work, the brush of her fingers when she handed him a tool, the shared smile over Samuel's jokes, the way her laughter seemed to include him in its warmth. A cold, relentless rain arrived in late September, trapping them in the barn with a sleeping Samuel nestled in the hay. The world shrank to the circle of golden light from Opaline's lantern, the scent of wet wool from her shawl, and the steady sound of the downpour on the roof. She stood close, watching him brush down his mare. Cyrus, his name on her lips, was a soft shock in the quiet. He turned. The lantern light caught the flecks of gold in her green eyes, softened the weary lines around them. I want to ask you something, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I don't know if I should. You can ask me anything. She took a steadying breath. That night in Tombstone, what really happened? He set the brush down, the old shame a cold stone in his gut. I killed a man. He leaned against the stall door, the memory a heavy weight. I was 22, full of cheap pride and cheaper whiskey. A card game. A man named Rufus McCord accused me of cheating. I wasn't, but he wouldn't let it lie. He pushed. I pushed back. It got out of hand. He was drunk, drunker than me. Swung wild, lost his footing, cracked his head on a table edge, died 3 days later without ever waking up. The confession hung in the hay-dusted air. You didn't mean to kill him, she breathed. Intent doesn't bring a man back from the dead. No, but it matters for the living. She stepped closer, the warmth of her body a tangible force. I've watched you with Samuel, with the animals. How hard you work. That's not a cold-blooded killer. Maybe not, but the blood's still on my hands. We all have things we regret. Her hand came to rest on his arm. The contact was a lightning strike after 5 years of drought. 5 years of isolation crashed over him, a physical ache. Opaline. I know it's improper, she whispered, her face tilting up to his. I know what they'd say, but I haven't felt this way since Robert died. I didn't think I could again. They were inches apart. Her lavender soap filled his senses. The air crackled. He raised a hand, his calloused fingers touching her cheek. She leaned into the touch like a plant toward the sun. I haven't had a woman in 5 years, he rasped, the raw truth torn from a place deep within him. Her breath hitched. Her eyes searched his. Cyrus. Before the space between them could vanish entirely, Samuel stirred in the hay, mumbling in his sleep. The moment shattered. They stepped back, both breathing as if they'd run a mile, the unspoken thing, now a living presence in the barn with them. We should get inside, she said, her voice unsteady. Yes, ma'am. As they gathered the sleeping boy and hurried through the rain to the house, the careful wall between them lay in ruins, replaced by something terrifying and wonderful and utterly new. The first serious snow fell in November, a silent, forgiving blanket that hushed the world and sealed the ranch off from the judgmental eyes of Cedar Falls. In this cocoon of white isolation, the fragile thing growing between them took root and hardened into something undeniable. Samuel's joy was a physical force, his laughter echoing as he built snow forts and learned to read the warning signs of a changing sky from Cyrus. Evenings were spent in the warm lamplight glow of the kitchen. Cyrus spinning carefully edited tales of Texas mustangs and endless horizons that made the boy's eyes shine, while Opaline watched her own expression, softening with a warmth that had been absent for too long. One such evening, with a blizzard howling outside, Samuel fell asleep at the kitchen table, his head pillowed on his arms amid a scattered deck of cards. Without a word, Cyrus gently gathered the boy and carried him to bed, tucking the quilts around his small frame, with a tenderness that spoke of a forgotten instinct. He adores you, Opaline said softly when Cyrus returned. She stood to clear the cards, her hand brushing his as she reached across the table. The contact was a spark in the quiet room. Neither moved. Her hand, instead of pulling away, turned palm up beneath his. Their fingers interlaced, a simple, profound fit that felt more like a homecoming than a discovery. I know this is complicated, she whispered, her voice thick. I know what people would say. They'd say a lot of things, Cyrus replied, his thumb tracing a callus on her finger. Most of them true. They'd say you deserve better than an ex-convict with blood on his hands. Maybe. Her grip tightened. But they wouldn't say you've brought more peace to this house than it's known since my husband died. They wouldn't say that for the first time in 2 years I don't feel alone. The confession hung between them, raw and luminous. Cyrus looked at their joined hands, a marvel in the flickering light. I never expected this. When I rode into town, I was just looking for work. I didn't think I deserved. What her eyes searched his, seeing the years of self-doubt. What didn't you think you deserved? This he breathed. A family. A woman who looks at me like I'm worth something. You are worth something, Cyrus Bogard. More than you know. The space between them vanished. Her free hand came up to touch his cheek, her fingers a whisper against the scar on his jaw. I want to kiss you. He said the words rough with a need that shook him. Then kiss me. The kiss was not tentative. It was 5 years of isolation crashing against 2 years of loneliness, a confluence of hunger and healing that left them both breathless. When they finally broke apart, the storm outside was a distant echo to the one that had just passed between them. He made to stand, to retreat to the safety of the barn and the boundaries that had just been obliterated. I should probably stay, she said, her hand still holding his, anchoring him. Just stay here with me. They talked as the fire burned down to embers, speaking of dreams buried by hardship and fears about the storm gathering, not in the sky, but in the town below. When he finally walked to the barn in the pre-dawn stillness, the cold air felt different on his skin. Everything had changed. The change was met at first light by the enemy it had created. Eli Whitmore's polished carriage arrived, cutting ugly tracks through the pristine snow. Thaddeus Clay and 2 other men flanked him like grim shadows. They found Cyrus mending harness in the barn, Samuel happily sorting tools beside him. Bogard Whitmore called out, his voice slick as oil. Might we have a word? Cyrus's gaze didn't waver from his work. Samuel, go find your mama. The boy fled, sensing the shift in the air. Cyrus set down the leather and faced the 4 men, noting how they fanned out to block the barn door. Gentlemen, you can saddle your horse and ride out, Clay said, his hand resting near his gun. Today, I've got a job here. I aim to keep it. Mrs. Turner's made some poor decisions lately. Whitmore smoothed his vest. We're here to help her see reason. What kind of reason? The kind that recognizes a convicted killer has no place around decent women and children. The old heat rose in Cyrus's chest, but he kept his voice low, controlled. I've done nothing wrong here. Haven't you? Clay took a step closer, his smile a cruel thing. Living under the same roof as a vulnerable widow, working alone with her day after day. Some might call that taking advantage. You'd be wrong. Would we? A man like you fresh out of prison, probably desperate for any kind of companionship? And there's poor Opaline isolated out here, grateful for any help. Easy prey for a man without scruples. The insinuation landed like a blow. It took every ounce of Cyrus's hard-won discipline not to smash his fist into Clay's leering face. You're out of line. Am I, or are you exactly what everyone says, a violent man who takes what he wants and damn the consequences? That's enough. Opaline's voice cut through the tension like a whip crack. She stood in the barn entrance, Samuel peeking from behind her skirts, her face a mask of cold fury. You are trespassing on my property. Opaline Whitmore began with false concern. We're only thinking of your welfare. This man's reputation is none of your concern. Mr. Bogard is my employee. It becomes our business, Clay spat, when it affects the moral character of our community. Opaline's laugh was sharp and brittle. Moral character. That's rich coming from you. Her eyes flicked to Whitmore, and something knowing passed between them. Now get off my land. Clay's hand moved to his gun. Maybe we should have a talk with the boy. Find out what kind of influence this killer's been having on him. The threat to Samuel was the tripwire. Cyrus stepped forward, his hands clenching into fists at his sides, the animal inside him straining against its cage. Touch that boy and I'll... You'll what? Clay's smile widened triumphant. Show us the real Cyrus Bogard, the one who kills men in saloon brawls. Cyrus knew Opaline's alarm was a splash of cold water. He stopped trembling with the effort, the taste of violence coppery in his mouth. Clay chuckled. That's what I thought. All that time in prison didn't change a damn thing, did it? You're still the same animal. Get off my land, Opaline said, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet. All of you, now. As they retreated to the carriage, Whitmore leaned out, his mask of civility gone. Think carefully about your choices, Mrs. Turner. Winter's coming. The bank's patience isn't unlimited. You might find yourself needing friends in town. After they were gone, Cyrus sank onto a hay bale, his head in his hands. The barn felt heavy with the ghost of his failure. Opaline sat beside him. You did the right thing. Did I? He looked up, his eyes haunted. He was right. For a second there, I wanted to hit him. I wanted it so bad I could taste it. But you didn't. That's what matters. Is it what happens next time? What happens when controlling myself isn't enough? She took his hand, feeling the fine tremor in his fingers. Then we'll face it. Together. That night, as a fresh snow began to fall, Cyrus stood at the barn window, watching the warm light spill from the kitchen. Inside, he knew Opaline was helping Samuel with his lessons, the scene a perfect portrait of a piece he was threatening to destroy. She found him there later, her face drawn. Whitmore has made it clear his interest in this ranch isn't purely financial. Her words were ice in the dark. He suggested that if I were to entertain his company, the mortgage might become more flexible. A cold, calculating fury entirely different from the hot rage of his youth settled in Cyrus's veins. That snake. I've refused him, of course, but now he's using the law to force my hand. Cyrus stared out at the twinkling lights of Cedar Falls, a constellation of condemnation. There's another way, he said, finally the idea forming from 5 years of reading in the dark. A legal challenge. If I'm right about the territorial statutes he's overstepped, we could file an injunction, force him to prove his claims in court. You said yourself a convicted killer against a respected banker. What if I wasn't representing you? He turned to her. What if you represented yourself and I just helped with the research? She studied him in the lamplight, seeing not the convict but the man he had forged himself into. You'd risk that people would know you were involved. People already know. The question is whether we let them drive us apart or stand together and fight. The decision was made in the silence that followed, but the fight chose its own time. The next morning, Sheriff Landry returned, her face grim. This time her visit was official. She carried a piece of paper that made Cyrus's blood run cold. A warrant for his arrest. The jail cell was a familiar hell. The same cramped space, the same stale air, the same bitter taste of powerlessness. Cyrus sat on the narrow bunk, the cold of the iron bars seeping into his bones as he stared through the small grated window at a slice of the town that had already tried and convicted him in its collective mind. Hours bled together, marked only by the shifting light and the occasional cough from the deputy, dozing by the stove that smoked more than it heated. The door to the cells creaked open. It wasn't the sheriff or the deputy. It was Eli Whitmore, looking as out of place as a diamond in a dung heap, a chair in his hands. He set it down outside the cell, with a quiet scrape that echoed in the silence. Comfortable accommodations, Whitmore asked, his voice slick with a mockery of concern. Cyrus didn't rise to the bait. He remained on the bunk, his posture deceptively relaxed. What do you want? To make you an offer. A chance to avoid a very unpleasant trial and a probable conviction? He leaned forward. Leave Cedar Falls. Tonight, the sheriff will discover the door was mysteriously left unlocked. By morning, you're just another drifter who moved on. Mrs. Turner will be free to make more practical decisions about her future. And if I refuse, then you stand trial for making terroristic threats. Given your history, the jury won't be sympathetic. 5 more years in Yuma, maybe 10. Whitmore's eyes glinted. And while you're gone, Mrs. Turner will lose her ranch. Find herself in need of a protector. The threat was a knife expertly placed. Cyrus felt the old hot rage surge, but he clamped down on it, his voice dangerously calm. I need time to think. Of course, until midnight. After that, the offer expires. While Cyrus wrestled with the devil in his cell, Opaline was facing her own in the lamplight of the barn. The legal books were a fortress of dry text and complex statutes, but she was a woman fighting for her home. She read with a frantic intensity, her fingers tracing the lines of text Cyrus had pored over for 5 years. The foreclosure notice wasn't just aggressive, it was illegal, and it was a pattern. The names of other properties, other widows, and struggling landowners leaped from the pages of a ledger she found tucked between 2 heavy law volumes. Each one had been acquired for a pittance by a company called Mountain Vista Holdings. Her breath hitched. A company owned by Eli Whitmore himself. But it was the faded newspaper clipping that stopped her heart. The Tombstone Gazette dated 5 years past. Local man dies in saloon altercation. The story was brief, but a smaller article beside it detailed the victim, Rufus McCord. Not just a hot-headed gambler. A known enforcer, a man with a history of convincing reluctant property owners to sell. The article mentioned his suspected employer, a prominent Tucson businessman, but the name was withheld for lack of evidence. The pieces crashed together. Whitmore hadn't just wanted Cyrus gone for his current scheme. Cyrus was a living witness to an old one, a man who could connect Whitmore to the criminal he'd killed. The truth was a weapon, but its handle was poison. As she stood, the weight of their situation pressed down on her. Who would believe the word of a convict and the woman who loved him against a pillar of the community? Deputy Miller's voice from the barn door made her jump. Mrs. Turner. He stood awkwardly, his hat in his hands. For what it's worth, I've been watching your boy at school. He's happier than I've seen him since his daddy died. And I've seen how careful Bogard is in town, how he never looks for trouble. Maybe that's worth something. It was a fragile thread of hope, but it was enough to grasp. At 11:30, the jail door didn't swing open by mystery. Deputy Miller stood there, keys jangling in his nervous hand. You're free to go, Bogard. Cyrus looked up, the sheriff's ultimatum still hanging over him. What? Charges have been dropped. Seems there were some irregularities in the complaint. What kind of irregularities? The kind that happen when a man's past catches up with him. Miller's meaning was clear. Whitmore's past. Opaline was waiting outside with the horses, Samuel bundled in blankets, asleep in the saddle of his own pony. The boy stirred as Cyrus approached. Mama said they were wrong. He mumbled, half asleep, before nestling back into the blankets. The ride back to the ranch was a silent, cold journey through a sleeping world. It wasn't until they were huddled around the kitchen table, the damning documents spread between them, steam from their coffee cups curling in the lamplight, that Opaline laid it all bare. The pattern of fraud, the shell company, the truth about Rufus McCord. Cyrus listened, the revelation landing not as a victory, but as a heavy, weary truth. He knew Cyrus set his voice hollow. All this time, Whitmore knew what McCord was. You didn't kill an innocent man, Cyrus. You killed a man who was helping him steal land from people just like us. The weight of 5 years shifted but did not lift. It doesn't change what I did. I still lost my temper. I still killed a man. But now we know why he wanted you gone. You're not just a threat to his scheme. You're a witness to his crimes. Her eyes were fierce. What do we do with this? Cyrus looked at the evidence, then at the woman who had unearthed it, her face etched with determination and fear. He thought of Samuel sleeping in the next room, the life they had built, the future they had almost lost. We use it, he said, the decision solidifying into resolve. We use all of it. The showdown didn't happen in a hushed courtroom. It happened in the dust of Cedar Falls Main Street under a hard, cold sun that offered no warmth. By noon, half the town had gathered, drawn by the seismic rumble of scandal. The air crackled with a nervous energy, a town holding its breath to see its foundation crack. Eli Whitmore stood on the steps of his bank, a bastion of respectability, now looking like a painted facade. Flanked by Thaddeus Clay and a few other stubborn loyalists, he wore a mask of righteous indignation that was beginning to crack at the edges. "This is preposterous," he declared as the federal marshals approached with Sheriff Landry. "Accusations based on the word of a convicted killer and a woman who's been living in sin with him." Opaline stepped forward, her voice clear and cutting, carrying over the crowd without a shout. "Nobody's living in sin, but somebody's been stealing land. It's time everyone knew the truth." What followed was a public unraveling. The marshals read the charges: fraud, conspiracy, extortion. Deputy Miller, his face set with grim duty, produced ledgers and documents seized from the bank, their pages a testament to years of systematic theft. The evidence was a flood, overwhelming and incontrovertible. But it was Cyrus's testimony that turned the tide. He spoke not with the fire of a man defending his honor, but with the calm, measured cadence of a man who had nothing left to prove. He described the night in Tombstone with a stark, unflinching honesty: the pride, the whiskey, the provocation, the tragic accidental result. Then he spoke of what he'd overheard that night, the conversations about softening up property owners, the threats McCord had boasted about making. "I didn't know then that I was stopping a criminal," Cyrus said, his gaze sweeping over the faces of his former accusers. "I just knew a man was threatening innocent folks, and I couldn't walk away." "You killed him," Clay shouted from the crowd, a last desperate throw. "Yes," Cyrus answered, the words simple, heavy, and final. "I did. And I've spent 5 years paying for that moment of anger. But if I had it to do over knowing what I know now, I'd try to do it different. But I wouldn't let him hurt innocent people." The raw honesty of it, the lack of excuse, disarmed them. The crowd's hostility, so long simmering, began to cool into something else: a dawning understanding, a collective shame. Nods of acceptance replaced crossed arms. When the marshals finally clamped shackles on Eli Whitmore's wrists, the sound was a period at the end of a long, ugly sentence. As the crowd began to disperse, murmurs of apology and offers of shaken hands were extended, but they were background noise. Samuel's voice, small and hopeful, cut through it all. He tugged on Cyrus's coat. "Does this mean we get to keep our ranch?" Cyrus looked down at the boy's upturned face, then at Opaline, seeing the same question reflected in her eyes beneath the layers of relief and exhaustion. "Yes, boy," he said, his voice thick. "We get to keep the ranch." He looked back at Opaline, the words that had been burning in him for months finally finding their moment. "And I get to stay with you, but not as your hired hand." The street fell silent, every ear tuned to the scene unfolding. Opaline's cheeks flushed in the cold air, but she didn't look away. "What are you saying?" she asked, her breath a soft cloud between them. "I'm saying I love you, Opaline Turner. I love your son. I love the life we've built together. And if you'll have me, not as an employee, but as your husband, I'd like to spend the rest of my days proving a man can change." Samuel whooped with pure, undiluted joy. The sound broke the tension, and the crowd erupted into applause, not of judgment, but of celebration. Opaline stepped forward, closing the final distance between them, and took his face in her hands. "Yes," she whispered against his lips, for only him to hear. Then louder for the world. "Yes, Cyrus Bogard. I'll marry you." 6 months later, under a wide June sky, the ranch was reborn. The Turner place, soon to be the Bogard place, buzzed with laughter and fiddle music. Wedding guests from town filled the yard, their earlier judgment replaced by heaping plates of food and genuine well-wishes. Cyrus stood on the porch in a suit that felt foreign and right, watching his bride walk toward him. Opaline seemed to glow in a simple white dress, Samuel beaming beside her, proudly carrying the ring. Pastor Williams, a man who had found his own path to grace through long conversations about redemption, stood ready. As they spoke their vows, promises of protection, partnership, and a love forged in second chances, the cheer that went up was the sound of a community healing. That evening, as the sun painted the mountains in farewell colors, Cyrus and Opaline stole away to the hill, overlooking their land. The sounds of the celebration below were a distant, joyful hum. "Any regrets?" she asked, leaning into his side. "Only one." Her heart stilled for a beat. "What's that? I wish I'd found you sooner." She laughed, then the sound light and free, and turned in his arms. "We found each other when we were meant to, Cyrus Bogard. That's what matters." She kissed him gently. "Mrs. Bogard," he said, trying out the sound. It felt like a new name for a new man. So do I, husband. Below them, Samuel's laughter rang out as he played with the other children, secure in the knowledge of the father he had found. The stars emerged one by one over the Colorado territory, and Cyrus Bogard, former convict, reformed, man, husband, and father, held his family close and knew without a doubt that he was finally home.